And I'm very pleased to be here and want to welcome all of you. And I'm also really pleased that Tim is in the position he's in as I return from PBS headquarters to KQED. When I left, Tim was in charge of new media, KQED Interactive, and I'm going to do that a lot probably. But when I'm returning, he's the Vice President for Digital Media and Education, and I think that's particularly important because while our educational services in decades past were very much connected to TV, and you would often see the education department as part of the television station, now it's much more part of new media. Television is still part of it. Video, I would say, is still part of it, but it's less connected, I think, to the television schedule. And this is an evolution that goes all the way back to the very beginnings. KQED was founded here over 50 years ago, and I actually went back and read the history of the stations when I returned from PBS to just reacquaint myself, and was reminded that KQED was actually created by a group of educators and school district officials here in the Bay Area from Oakland and San Francisco and other communities, actually created the station and chartered the station and applied to the FCC for the license and the original funding from the Carnegie Endowment. And early on, KQED basically was an extension of formal education. The original programs on the air were actually were courses before we had entertainment and arts and other kinds of programming, documentaries. And as Tim mentioned, then along came Sesame Street less than 10 years later. Ready to Learn followed, and a real emphasis on reading skills before children would enter school became part of the mix. And in 1995, which is when I got to KQED the first time, and I got there this year the second time, one of our panelists, Milton Chen, who's with the George Lucas Educational Foundation now, was at KQED and was the director of something called the Center for Education and Lifelong Learning, which became Education Network now in Tim's portfolio. And in 1995, and some of you will remember of this and many of you won't, we were just in the waning days of broadcasting programs in the middle of the night so teachers could turn on the timers on their VCRs and get the next Nova so that they would have it to use in the classroom in the weeks following. And during the years as we began to enter the digital revolution, both in digital television and in new media, the VCRs in the middle of the night practice went away, and the rate of change has only accelerated in the entire 15 years that I've been in the system. And by the time I got to PBS in 2006, and my job as Chief Content Officer included television programming, but also educational services and other aspects of content, we weren't talking about television programs anymore. In many cases, in terms of K-12 classroom use, we were talking about things like purpose-built digital learning assets and video clips and interactives and games and things that were really tied directly to standards and may not have ever even appeared in a television show, even if it was video, because it was specifically produced to achieve a particular result for a teacher in a classroom around state standards. So we'd gotten into an entirely different kind of service where you couldn't just repurpose television shows anymore. The television shows were valuable, and I'm talking more about the primetime shows now. KQED has been a leader in that, particularly through the Quest Multimedia Initiative for science education, because a lot of these digital learning objects have been created and downloaded by teachers throughout the state of California, and hopefully soon in other parts of the country, to use in the classroom. So you have an organization that is involved in broadcasting, television and radio, and involved in serving the general public with media over new platforms, but that is also an educational service that draws on that institutional expertise, but now it's a very different task. You can't just multi-purpose create a television show and expect it to work in the classroom. Now, what we're here today to talk about, though, rather than K-12, is preschool. And that has always been public broadcasting's sweet spot. Starting with Sesame Street and continuing over the years with Ready to Learn, Ready to Teach, helping formal and informal preschool educators, whether they are parents or daycare providers or preschool teachers, has been a very important part of what we do. And creating children's educational content that children can consume in the home that truly is both entertaining, like a lot of what else is on TV, but the difference being that it actually has valid educational value and goes through an evaluation process and a lot of research leading into the creation of the content to ensure that children are not only being engaged, but they in fact are being prepared for school. And a lot of emphasis on that was reading initially, and as you know now we've moved into STEM also for preschool, for getting kids ready for school. And during my years at PBS, we made two significant, really sweeping changes in terms of particularly preschool educational services. One, we determined that the schedule needed to be refreshed. In other words, the programs that our stations are broadcasting around the country during the day for preschool children needed updating. Sesame Street was a program that was constantly reinventing itself, but what else were we going to have there with Sesame Street? And over the course of 5 years, we introduced 10 completely new children's educational television series, ranging from programs like Curious George to Sid the Science Kid, which came to us from our friends at KQED in Los Angeles, and we have representatives from KQED here today. So running the gamut from STEM to reading, and really putting both educational rigor into how those programs were creating and having the right kinds of advisors, but also making them fun so that kids would want to watch them, and that's been successful. The second part was really transitioning onto new platforms. So during those years, both the pbskids.org site and the preschool video player were introduced, and then for school-age kids, the PBS Kids Go site. And those have both been enormously successful, and the great advantage in the new media space was that children could not only watch these educational programs, but they could interact with the programs. We came up with techniques for overlaying educational games within a video and also surrounding the videos with an environment that included both educational experiences and interactivity, but also ways for parents to track children's progress. And we believe that the programs that are created primarily for television and primarily for children's consumption at home, and this has been a long debate, I know, and I'm sure will be discussed today, are also useful in preschool environments. And in other words, that turning on the television in daycare or preschool is okay if you're using the right kind of programming and it's an active environment where the educator's engaged. And so before I introduce our keynote speaker, I just want to brag about one thing. There's one new preschool show coming to the national PBS schedule on all of your stations this fall, and it was one of the last ones that I had the chance to approve while I was at PBS. And I'm particularly proud that it's coming from KQED, and that is Cat in the Hat knows a lot about that. It will be the first ever Dr. Seuss-based series. It is a science series and designed to inspire preschoolers about science, about exploration, about discovery, and hopefully build the engineers of the future. So now it's my pleasure to introduce one of my colleagues from my Washington, D.C. years. She joined the Corporation for Public Broadcasting in 2008 after serving as Superintendent of Public Instruction for the Ohio Department of Education. She advanced Ohio from the middle of the pack up to number 6 among all 50 states, and also held executive posts at Missouri and Massachusetts Departments of Education. She chaired the Education Department at Emmanuel College in Boston and held a 5-year appointment with the Education Tech Center at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And she is now Senior Vice President and Chief Advisor and System Consultant on Education Policy at CPB. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Susan Zeldin.